Hannah Maloney is talking to us tonight. She's an educator and permaculture designer, co-director of Good Life Permaculture, based in lutruwita, aka Tasmania, and a guest presenter on Gardening Australia. The folks at Good Life Permaculture walk the talk and a great inspiration on growing food, implementing permaculture ethics and principles, and building community. And Hannah recently released a book called The Good Life, How to Grow a Better World, which is about how to live a good life in the face of the climate emergency. And I don't know how many people you've got it, but I've like about a quarter of the way through and I'm loving her style. So I'm really looking forward to this. Tonight, Margaret, I believe, will be asking the questions. We're sort of putting the, it's a,
oh, sorry. Sorry, that's my daughter.
I wasn't sure what the noise was.
Oh, dear.
Right. Margaret will be asking questions of Hannah. If you want to submit a question, then I don't know if we organize this, but you could probably, yep, keep an eye on the chat. If you're in the room, then lift your hand up and Matt will keep an eye on things and take your question as necessary. So thank you very much for joining us, Hannah.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. And yes, my daughter is in the background and may just arrive at any moment. So thanks for your understanding. Yeah. So Margaret, did you want me to have a bit of a yarn about my background? Is that how you'd like me to start?
On mute.
Oh, you're on mute. Oh.
We would like to know how you actually made it to permaculture. So what's your background? How did you come? Is this something in your childhood? You know, how did you end up doing permaculture?
Yeah, great. So I grew up in Meanjin in Brisbane, and I grew up in the big city. So very, you know, all the concrete you can imagine. I grew up in West End, which is beautifully multicultural and quite diverse and alternative in the 80s and 90s, and still to this day. My dad set up a herb nursery in a quarter-acre urban home in the backyard, and to us that was very normal. But we grew up in quite a unique urban farming environment, so my understanding of what's possible in the urban context is a bit distorted, because I'm like, oh, if you want to, you can do pretty much anything, because that's what I was surrounded by growing up. And beautifully, when maybe when I was around 10 years old, my mum and dad bought the neighbouring house next to us. So we expanded the herb nursery into that garden. And then my grandmother moved across the road a few years later, and Dad expanded into her garden. So we ended up with maybe around half an acre of herb nursery in the middle of West End in Meanjin, Brisbane. And I think that has undoubtedly provided a huge foundation for what's possible in an urban context, or in any context when you choose to. And also the community, broadly speaking, was quite alternative and interested in challenging the status quo. And so there was lots of political conversations around our, dinner table every night, and beyond that into our community as well. So I think those things like really encouraged critical thinking in all of the kids in my family, and really carried on to me questioning everything. And I think as a teenager, and as you're maturing and you're looking out into the broader world, I was like, what's going on with the world? Like, it doesn't look like the adults are, got it together. And that was everything from education structures, climate change, all the things. And so I think when I graduated from high school, I chose, instead of going to university, I'm going to go take myself on a self-guided tour around Australia to learn about things that I feel around environmental and social justice, because this was kind of before the internet was really readily available. You couldn't just like go and see the thing. And so I went to Woomera Detention Centre, which has since closed, in South Australia. I went to numerous forest blockades across Victoria. I travelled to Western Australia to what was called the Students of Sustainability Conference at one of the universities over there, and very much just had a lot of the feeling of something's not quite right in the world, very much affirmed by witnessing quite a lot of social and environmental devastation, if you like. And that really cemented my path in life. When I'm not 100% sure what I want to do, but it's not this, I don't want to join in and perpetuate this system. And oh, I should have said, growing up in the herb nursery, the word permaculture was just like thrown around, you know. And so it's just around. I'm like, oh yeah, whatever. Permaculture is something to do with growing organic veggies, whatever. Like that's not a big deal. But when I was 18 and traveling, I met Anne-Marie and Graham Brookman in South Australia. And to this day, they are some of my like most favourite humans. They are just so generous and so skilled and talented at what they do. And I used to work on their farm picking pistachios and whatever had to happen during the season. And I think that was when I went, oh, permaculture. Oh, it's not just the organic gardening, it's a way of life. It's more holistic. And I was in and out of South Australia and Adelaide and their farm for a good 3 years, quite solidly. But mostly still doing a lot of, so much to tell you. Oh my God. How do I do this?
Keep going.
So, but I was still very much involved in a lot of frontline activism. So really still very much involved in forest campaigns, mostly in Tasmania, which I'd also visited during that time. And really just working so hard about frontline activism, which was mostly around federal election campaigns and state election campaigns in Tasmania. And just noticing how I just kept getting burnt out. I couldn't sustain the energy required. It wasn't within my nature, within my skill set. I'm not sure what it was, but I think we all have natural places of being in the world, and that wasn't my natural place, well, my natural strength, if you like. And so maybe around, the 5th year into crashing and burning, like consistently, I went, oh, I might just go do this 2-week permaculture design course that people keep banging on about. I hadn't done one yet. And so I took 2 weeks leave and went and did that. And I was like, oh.
Where did you do the PDC?
Well, it was in Tasmania. I had since moved to Tasmania at that time. And it was with Rick Coleman, who used to run the Southern Cross Permaculture Institute in Victoria, which has since closed. But he came over and ran a PDC in Northwest Tasmania. Yeah. And it was so good, I think, because by that time I was around 24, I think, and I'd experienced quite a lot of life. I'd really thrown myself out there. And so it's good to be able to sit down and learn about permaculture, the theory of permaculture design, socially, environmentally, politically, economically, and just go, oh, right, I can start joining some dots here and I can understand why frontline activism hasn't been the most effective way of using my skills. And I literally went home, quit my job at the Wilderness Society. And because I had many years of working on farms and community and school gardens behind me, I always kind of kept that going in the background of activism. I just switched full time to permaculture, like within a week. I was working part-time in a school garden and constantly writing grants. It's like I can like whip out grants like that. I'm very good at getting community projects up and going and very good at creating something where nothing was previously happening. So I embraced those skills. And I was also studying, I finally went to university and studied something called community cultural development, which is all about working with people creatively to bring about meaningful change. And my form of creativity was always through community and school gardens. So I was always bringing people together around food or gardening and tackling issues around community isolation and connectedness, and always climate resilience, like always. Like how can we, look after soil, increase local food security, all those different things. And I think permaculture, after so many years of activism, I went, I can do permaculture is like solution-based activism where you're highlighting the problems, but you're focusing on the solutions. And I went, I can do this for the rest of my life. And that was...
Yeah, it's probably not as much crash and burn because you are just not trying to fight the system. You've got a system which provides solutions. So
it's super hard work and I still get tired, but I'm much more nourished personally and as our family and our community. And it nourishes other people, and that's the sweet spot, and then I can happily do this forever. And as soon as I switched over to that approach of activism, I've had like approximately 10,000% more success in engaging people because people start to tune out when you just go, what you're doing is wrong, or you have to change now. It's really confronting and challenging for people to try to engage with that consistently or at all. But if you approach people and go, look at this amazing way of being and look how happy and abundant we are, they go, oh, that looks sweet as. I want to have a go at that.
So is this how you arrive at the Good Life Permaculture project?
Yeah, so I've missed quite a few things in that story, but at one point I was living in Melbourne working with a fantastic organisation called Cultivating Community, and they manage school and community gardens on public housing estates. And I was fortunate enough to work there for 2 years. And I moved to Melbourne because I fell in love, and that was just the best thing. And I was like, I'm going to come to Melbourne, I'm going to hang out, and we got married, and oh, this is so much fun. And I was so stoked to work with Cultivating Community because they were just the pin-up of urban agriculture, and still to this day are such trailblazers in Australia. But we always knew we wanted to leave Melbourne because we couldn't afford to live there, and we wanted a bit more of a smaller city lifestyle, basically. So we were always going to move back to Tasmania. And so we finally came back, and when we arrived back, I was like, nothing's really happening. I just come from working with Australia's most innovative NGO, Cultivating Community. I was like, there's nothing here in Tasmania. What am I going to do?
Yeah, well, it's much less people there, and bigger distances and smaller towns. It's easy to find the like-minded people in big metropolitan cities like Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne.
Yeah, and there's
millions of people, and you always find someone who's got the same. So how did you manage to build a community then around Good Life Permaculture in Tasmania?
The reason I started Good Life Permaculture was to build consistent community conversations and connection, because there's lots of great one-off things or short-term projects happening around permaculture and climate resilience, but there was nothing building. I'm like, okay, I've got to either leave or I've got to start something. And so I started Good Life Permaculture, and just started doing things that I could already do. So I could already teach. I'd already been doing lots of community workshops. So I just started running compost workshops, and it turns out composting is like to this day, I could fill a hall of people who want to learn about compost. Like people are just like fascinated. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty good at writing grants. So I just started writing grants around doing community composting projects. Actually, I did that for a lot of time. And what I'd do is I'd read through at local governments' strategic plans around waste management and sustainability. Like, oh, you guys are promising to do all this cool stuff, but you're under-resourced with your staffing. Your budget's tiny, but I can work with that 10 grand and I can do some really amazing things so you can tick your box. And they're like, and we built some relationships, and I'm still working with those people today. So I was very strategic and to get some money just to and relationships and partnerships to build those I guess those networks that can help things happen. So I really drew on my people skills there to make things happen, and I just started doing workshops and kind of community projects, and eventually lots and lots of landscape design, which is so much work there if you want it. People really wanting support for their farm and urban properties. So
is this like permaculture farms and gardens you design?
Yeah, that's right. So everything's permaculture, edible landscapes, and always with a native element as well. So we really try to foster biodiversity in every shape and form, and of course it's not just about humans, it's about all the animals, all the critters as well, and that includes lots of natives. So I do most of my work these days. It's probably half of my time is with landscape design, and then maybe a bit less of that than now. Than in community projects. I'm organising an edible garden tour, similar to what sounds like you're doing up there.
Yep. Yeah, we actually have a project called Sydney Edible Garden Trail, which is last weekend of March. It's non-for-profit, so any profit we make, that will go back to community as grants for community and school gardens. We've done it already. Previously, this is sort of the third year. And hopefully we've got about 50 gardens in sort of northern and central Sydney.
Brilliant. That's so inspiring.
This is urban. Sydney has got millions and millions
Yeah.
people and so many gardens, and we just wanted to showcase what is possible
Yeah.
to do in an urban garden without going out to the country and buying yourself 5-acre
Oh,
farm.
yeah,
You know,
totally.
most Australians live in cities.
Yeah, like most of us. And we actively moved to, like, we live in Hobart. It's a small city, but it's definitely a city. But we actively chose a city. People are often surprised, like, oh, I thought you'd be on a big permaculture farm. I'm like, no. That means you have to drive everywhere. You're quite isolated, and you can't just pop into your friend's house. So we don't have a car. I have a bike. I can walk and ride everywhere. I can borrow cars. It's much more people orientated, community orientated, if you like, which we love. So cities are great. I'm a big fan. And so the other things I do is we still run lots of workshops as well, and I just call them community projects. So that can be quite opportunistic about what opportunities or grants are available, and I just make things happen. And it's all angled. Everything I do is angled about how do we tackle the climate emergency and build resilience and focus the narrative on solutions for the future rather than all the doom and gloom that's thrown around and people really latch onto in the media. So that's a big reason why I wrote the book that I wrote last year. It's very much the reasoning. It's a lot of how-tos and stuff, but it's very much why I do what I do, and the bigger meaning behind, you know, all the little things that we do is like, this is why I garden, this is why I make yogurt, you know, and really threading through the concept of radical hope, which is a great concept I learned from Rebecca Solnit, an American author. And it's very much about how, you know, in the face of huge uncertainty, which is the climate emergency, managing to have active radical hope where you try everything you can to turn the ship around, knowing that it may not work, but knowing that there's a chance that it just might. And I think that's that really bold and courageous optimism and love and courage and action, which really drives me and fuels me forward, because I don't turn away from all the
ugliness.
Challenging. You have to acknowledge the ugliness. You have to be aware of the facts. Otherwise, you're just flapping around in naive fairyland. It's not useful. You have to be super onto it and up to date. And you have to point your energy towards the solutions, because that's what will, you know, shift us as a culture to a more positive and safe future. Yeah,
well, I believe that the things you do, it's not just what you do for yourself, you know, you live more sustainable, but it gets contagious. You educate people see what you do. So it's not just yourself changing the world around you, your little shell, your home, your garden, but it's others who learn from you. They see it's possible.
Yeah.
So, you know, they can do this too. So
absolutely.
This is absolutely great.
Yeah.
So I was just wondered, you've got immediate community around you, I guess. So how do you work with the community? What are the benefits of sort of community work? What is happening around you?
Oh, in the broader Tasmanian community?
Not necessarily. I would think more about the, you know, the local one. People you work with, your neighbors, your family. Great. Your friends, you know, how does it work?
That's really cool, Margaret. So when I started Good Life Permaculture, I felt like I was involved in every single initiative. Like all my fingers were all spread between all the pies in the local community, because it's like getting stuff happening. And now I'm like not really involved. There's so much happening, and I'm involved in a couple of things, and, you know, aware of lots of things. And that is brings such a joy to me, because it's you know, I have not done this single-handedly, of course. It's like the times are changing and people are really engaging, but for like people that are really leading different initiatives around you know, climate resilience, project planning for our local bushfire safety plan, they're people that I've known for so many years now from permaculture workshops, and they've kind of taken this concept and tweaked it for their own passion and interest or expertise, and really honed it and gone, okay, this is what I can offer the world. And they're just doing it. I'm like, this is so cool. It's like the happiest thing is that I'm not involved in all the things. It means that there's all these great local leaders stepping up, and we're all local leaders when we choose to be, aren't we? I think that's a really beautiful thing. So yeah, there's community gardens popping up. There's lots of food growing workshops, heaps of fermentation things. Fermentation's huge. I don't know why. Well, it's awesome. That's why. But there's so much really practical how to, like the beautiful reskilling revolution is very much underway, I feel, across the world. And that includes in Nipaluna, Hobart, for sure.
I think it started to speed up when we've got the pandemic and people started to think what's important. Eating healthier, maybe teaching kids something different than what they learn at school. So I think it was in certain way, it was actually a good time for people like yourself, because there were people willing to learn. They suddenly discovered there is something different happening outside of the corporate world and the daily commute by, car or train or whatever. They discovered it's nice to be at home and to do something about it. So
yeah, I think there was some really significant moments, I think, for people collectively going, oh, what is it that I hold most important in my life, and I think that did bring a lot of people back to some of the basics of connection, of community, of, for a lot of people was food production and all those kinds of practical skills that are associated with it. And so I really think we're still seeing those ripple effects of what is most important to us. And I think it's very, there's been a lot of media in recent times about how the great resignation, overseas and also in Australia, people resigning from jobs which they no longer think are fulfilling, or maybe have the catalyst to step away from, to go, well, how do I want to spend my life, And I think it's a really good time to recheck. I write about this a lot in my book. It's like, what are the values that you hold most dear in your life? Because I think that can really guide the actions. If you have some capacity to be flexible, you go, actually, I don't want to work at this office job or whatever it might be. I want to do this particular thing that brings me huge joy and which helps bring others joy as well. It's all very contextual, but I think remembering what is most important is such a huge thing that we are not encouraged to do in our culture. And I really like to talk it up whenever I can. Yeah.
So staying on this topic, so what would be your tips on how to advocate to change the current system? We've seen some things happening sort of organically because of the pandemic, and people being cut off from work and from commute and staying at home and finding, some other important things to do. But what would be your tips for the change? So what do we do?
Yeah, look, and I'm all for doing all the composting, all the community connecting and all the food growing. That stuff's like a solid, awesome thing. But when people ask me for my top 3 tips, I say vote for climate safe policies, and we've got a federal election coming up imminently. So let that guide your voting choices. I say listen to First Nation voices in every context, and get to know your local First Nations community leaders and all the members, as many as possible. And I say think about where your money is and move it to super funds or banks that don't invest in any fossil fuels, because that's what's really driving the climate chaos, the impending chaos. They're the 3 things, and none of them have got anything to do with gardening.
But it's not just about gardening.
Exactly.
It's true that a lot of people actually made it into permaculture through gardening, food growing, and then they discover it's more to it. It's community building tool. It's, tools for mental change, for system change. So it's more, but most of us started with gardens.
It's cool, including myself. But I think the breakthrough for me to latching onto permaculture is like, oh, it's not just about gardening. It's like, I can work with this because it's everything. And that's really appealing to me, because it's a transferable framework to change the system. And they're some of the 3 biggest ones. And Bill Mollison wrote and talked a lot about banking systems and about how we have to change banking systems. And I think, and more broadly, money systems, you can talk, that's what I was referring to earlier. And I think that's so key. Money is power. And I think when we kind of don't ignore that and go, okay, well, where is our money? And regardless of how much or how little you have, that's powerful. And so where you choose to put that is significant. Yeah.
Well, we consumers, we can make a lot of change. Like 20 years ago, you could not buy organic food in supermarkets. And people started to be conscious about all the chemicals and additives to food, started buying outside of supermarkets from farmers markets, organic farmers, and supermarkets lost so much money. They actually decided, oh, it would be better if you would have organic food. And in the process, they supported a lot of organic farming, because on a big scale, Coles, Woolworths, they've got a lot of power when it comes to supporting farming. And organic food started to be less expensive. So, you know, this is what we consumers achieved by voting with our wallet. So what you are saying, you think where to put your money, it's absolutely true. And it happened, it's happening. And yeah, we can do that.
And I think a key thing there is, how do we bring everyone with us, and not in a weird cultish way, but in a way where no one is left behind in the ideal transition towards climate safety. So currently the risk is that the few white privileged people, majority white people who with education and luxury of money, can transition safely and can afford the organic food, which is still not accessible to everybody. And
yes,
the responsibility of those of us with more privilege is to go, how can we think beyond ourselves and beyond our fence lines and beyond our community sometimes, to make sure that the movement that we're all kind of aspiring for is a just movement and it doesn't leave anyone behind. And I think that's a really, that's not a, I don't have an easy answer for that, but I'm highly acutely aware of it. How do we make sure these conversations are inclusive and diverse, and we move forward together?
Yeah, I see like three major groups of people getting into permaculture. It's people who have money and land, and you know, they have like large gardens and they can afford buying organic food and doing all this stuff. And young people who don't really own a lot, so they join community projects because they are interested. And
sorry, yeah, correct.
That's okay. Look, it's
sorry. Hey, Frida, I'm on the meeting, remember? Yeah, great. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
How old is she?
Frida is 7 and my partner's away for the week. So we're just negotiating this time together.
That's okay. Look. Yeah.
Sorry,
my older grandson is 7. So yeah, I know how it is.
Yeah.
So you are very busy, you know, you do a lot of stuff. Do you still have time to go into your own garden? Back to the basics, you know, not thinking about changing the system, but just recharging your battery, going into the garden and growing something edible.
Yeah, we do have a really highly active garden. So all our veggies and fruit trees, like we do have, I never have as much time as I want to. So I do, when I'm running through the garden, like, oh, there's a job. Oh, I haven't got time. Oh, another job. But I'm in the garden every day. And so we have 2 milking goats. We have chickens. This is my daughter, Frida.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Sorry. And so it's very active. And I have a friend, I've just actually decided to employ a local friend, to help me in the garden once a week, which is great. So I think I've chosen to prioritise the garden as a really important thing. It's the reason why we do a lot of the things that we do. She's just going to watch some Bluey now, by the way.
Yeah, I think we can relate to that. A lot of us are in full-time employment, or you know, run our own businesses, and sometimes it's just not, or health-wise, it's not enough time to work in a garden. But it's such a great, rewarding activity to grow your own food, or just be with growing things. You know, it's absolutely fantastic. So you do so many things. How do you stay positive with all that?
Oh, well, I think I stay positive by like holding on to radical hope. I have some really practical things in my life that keep me level-headed, and so I do a lot of exercise. I took up the ukulele last year just so I could sing badly. It makes me happy.
It's not about being, you know, Instagram worthy.
Yeah, right. No, don't worry.
Just enjoying it.
I'm really interested in doing things which are completely unnecessarily for anything in the world, except that they bring joy to myself, and that helps me bring more positivity to other people. So that's something that I had to learn. I had to kind of relearn maybe a year and a half ago. I'm like, oh, hang on, I'm too busy, and there's a risk of crashing and burning here. Like even when all this great work, because we just want to give. What will give me energy? And so exercising, I've taken up pumping iron. It's really good. And I took up trail running through the bush, which I'm very slow at, but I really love. And then I play the ukulele. So there's these really practical things I've had to design into my life to make sure I can have the joy and the positivity, because, you know, when you're paying attention to the bigness of what's going on in our world politically and environmentally and socially, it's quite enormous. And so I never not want to pay attention to that, and I have to find a way to have random acts of joy and fun amongst it all. Otherwise, what's the point?
Oh, yeah.
Why are we here, you know?
Otherwise you would just lay down and die, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because everything is so negative. Most of mainstream media is just feeding us all this negativity and sensation, and it's sometimes hard to see what's real and what's not, and to keep your life in balance. Yeah. So I'm just looking what other questions we've got. How did you end up presenting for Gardening Australia?
Oh, great question. I know, what a sweet gig. Oh my God, I'm still just like, woo. Well, back in 2019, they invited me just to come on as a one-off guest presenter to do a series of 6 stories around sustainable food production. So I got to choose 6 properties in Tassie and Victoria, and that was the deal. I'm like, cool, I'm stoked as. And so we did those and they aired, and they went, oh, do you want to do a little bit more? I'm like, yeah. And I think I'm into my 3rd year of I'm still a guest presenter.
Well, with probably it's easier because you don't feel the pressure of producing something like every week for 40 weeks a year.
Yeah, no, sure. So, but it is such a wonderful team. Like I grew up with Gardening Australia in the background, and you know, Mr. Darling, Peter Cundall. I remember just watching, because we weren't allowed to watch a lot of TV as young people, but I remember going, and there wasn't much interesting alternative stuff on TV when you did watch it. And I remember watching Gardening Australia, like when I would have been like a young teenager, and going, oh, this is interesting. This is very, very different to every single thing else on TV. And Peter Cundall's total radical, like absolute radical, and in and out of the garden, you know. And I just went, he's cool. I would have been like 12 or something, or 13, like, yeah, he's a dude.
Oh, you were actually an exception, because I talked to Peter Cundall about how to encourage teenagers into gardening, especially food growing, and he goes, forget it. He says they've got so much on their plate, you know, growing up, sexuality, friends, just, you know, changing the mindset. It's just too much. So very few of them are able to do anything else. He said the young kids, they are fine. And then older people, he said, usually when they sort of go through university age and they may go into activism, or when they've got kids and they think, my household is full of chemicals. What do I do about it? So yeah, but otherwise, he said teenagers are really difficult to engage. So it's good if they grow in gardens as children, as you have, and I have as well.
Yeah. I think he's mostly right. I think there's a few of us weirdos who are just like strangely into it, but but I was like, as a teenager, I was off the show. Like I was in a really fun, wild kind of way, but I always came back to the garden. And but you know, it's a big time of your life. There's a lot going on, you know, so you got to acknowledge that. But being on Gardening Australia, dream come true. Everybody there is just as awesome as you would expect them to be, and I count my lucky stars. Don't take it for granted at all.
Well, they are great people. Here in Sydney, that's mostly Costa Georgiades, because he's based here.
Yeah, of course.
And he has several gardens of our members. They actually featured in Gardening Australia.
Yeah.
And we talked about permaculture and obviously Costa, you know. I remember for a while, I don't think Gardening Australia was even allowed to use the P word.
Yeah, oh, totally. And I've known Costa since before, sorry, hey, Frida. I remember Costa, I've known him for quite a few years now, since before he started Gardening Australia, and it was such a sweet gig for him to get. Like, we're all just so pumped. Okay, sure. Just making himself hot chocolate now. And we're all so excited for him, and still are. He's such a rare gem. And in those early years of him being there, he's like, oh, it's a bit of a culture shift, you know. like, you know, just trying to get some of these concepts in there. But now it's all on. And I think it's a sign of his groundwork that he's done, standing on the tall shoulders of Peter Cundall and others. But it's really, people are ready for that, and people are super hungry for it as well. Like, I just get slammed with, you know, I don't think I could ever answer all the questions that come my way about permaculture and associated things. So there's so many of them. Yeah.
I think we are sort of going full circle, because I grew up in my parents' food garden, and that was normal. We would grow food, and we would have ornamentals at the front, but you know, we would grow food. It was normal. And then sort of Peter Cundall Gardening Australia, when I used to watch the program, it was sort of like, well, it's sort of older people gardening, you know, nice manicured gardens, beautiful flowers, but it's sort of, it looks nice. And Peter Cundall is passionate, and he talked about veggies and Tino as well. But with Costa, I think he really engaged with younger people.
Yeah. Oh.
So that's the big change, and with kids too.
Yeah.
He does a lot of work. So
we're so lucky to have him. I just think the world is so lucky to have a Costa in it. Like, I don't think yeah, I've never met anyone like him.
oh yeah, he's definitely unique.
Yeah.
And very passionate, but you're passionate too.
Oh, so, totally.
And hopefully some people, I could see in comments, some people actually read your book, and I haven't, so I'm going to buy myself a copy.
Oh, wonderful.
But I'm just looking at other questions coming up. Someone is asking about your top tips for engaging a primary school community, including administrators, to establish a school edible garden program.
Yeah, great.
Anything like that you've been involved in? Is there anything you could, that's from Michelle. That's a question from Michelle.
Yeah, absolutely. I've worked with quite a few schools over the years, and I think the biggest one, because all schools are overworked and under-resourced in my experience, and that's mostly with public schools I've worked with. And so usually what has had to happen to enable a school garden to get up, and that can be quite a compact space. It can still have a big impact regardless of how big it is physically, is to go, okay, I'm going to help you find some funds to make this happen, because usually the budget isn't there to make it happen. And so that can get external funding from council or other, you know, nurseries or, you know, networks that make sense in your particular community. But I think that's the biggest thing that's been enabled us to over the years, is like, we need more additional practical support here, because the school community is so stretched, like, and they're doing amazing work with what they have. So while the will is often there, the practical you know, time and all the resources isn't necessarily available. So my biggest tip is go work out who your people resources are. Like, who is that, yourself, or is it parents? Is it some of the school staff? Is it the school landskeeper, the groundskeeper, sorry? And then, like, if there's a little team, that's ideal. And then work out what is it that we need. Usually it's money or, you know, materials, and go, where can we get those things? It's kind of like working out how can you have that support system to make it happen. And so that's my biggest tip. Don't necessarily rely on the school administration to design and deliver that whole thing, but you have to have that buy-in. So there's that, you know, absolute support, emotional support, I don't know. But because ideally, you know, you get a garden up, ideally every school year is interacting with it, rather than it just being sitting there and only one class using it. So you have to have buy-in from each teacher, where they can integrate their existing curriculum into that garden, rather than having to create a whole new class, because they probably don't have the time to fit in a new class, and they definitely don't have the time to create a new curriculum, is my experience.
I wonder if there are any programs which exist. That there used to be, I think, school kitchen garden program by Stephanie, what was her name? Alexander. Yes, Stephanie Alexander, thank you. Yeah. So I just wonder if that was something, you know, other schools could copy, if it's available. And from my experience with some school gardens, it really depends on who is the person who manages the garden. Oh yeah. And totally. Very often it's a parent or two parents, and once the child is through the school system, that's it. You know, this sort of support goes, and there is no one really left to take care of gardens. It would be great if there would be a role like coordinator for local school gardens, a person who, you know, visit gardens at school and help and educate others what to do with them. So instead of a parent who really, as you said, they are stretched, they are busy people, they have families and everything. If we could have someone who would be paid by the government and, you know.
Oh, mate, 2 thumbs up. That's ideal. I think absolutely we have to be heading that way. So as well as your English, your math and your science teacher, you have the garden teacher, like should just be locked in, and the art teacher, of course. And so I think it's a really important cultural change which needs to happen. But I think the main thing is often we wait for the ideal. It's like, actually, let's just start with what we have and do what we can, just get something happening, and then build the conversations. But ideally, there is a paid 1 or 2 garden coordinator to keep things rolling and keep the momentum. And ideally, you have that succession plan. So if it is a parent, when their kids graduate and they naturally move on, that there's some other people or someone filling that space. And so these things are huge. And I must acknowledge that with every kind of community project, there's highs and there's lows, and there's high and it's low, and that's how it rolls, you know. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a pattern of grassroots initiatives where energy comes and goes and changes. And the main thing is that even if something finishes, the main thing is that it happened in the first place, and you've got to just keep going with that positive outlook, that just because it's finished or it's not as good as it used to be, or whatever kind of narrative's flying around, it's like, at least it's happening, or at least it happened. And that's a really good thing to hold on to.
Well, the most important thing is that something happens.
Yeah.
It goes in the right direction. Our lives are not really something that goes on Instagram. And what you see on Instagram and, you know, other social media, it's usually curated photographs. Everything looks fantastic and ideal. But life, it's not like that. No. So even if you could start with something small, as you said, start with what you've got, it's still going in the right direction. And we may not achieve this ideal state of everything going smoothly and being 100% sustainable and permaculture in our lives, but at least to start with something.
Absolutely. And I think like the work that I'm really involved in, which is around activism and climate change and just culture change in general, it's actually kind of, it's long-term, multi-generational work. And it's like we have to, you know, we're standing on the very tall shoulders of previous generations who've done so much work in every area, and we've picked up the baton and now we're doing stuff and we're going to pass it on one day. And I think it's like we can't expect to solve everything in our one very short lifetime, but we can expect to have a crack and try different things. And I think that's helps my brain, because we can't solve everything right now.
Yeah, I'm looking at young people, sort of 20-somethings and 30-somethings, and I work as a PermaBee coordinator in a large council gardens of the permaculture, demo gardens, native gardens. I'm very happy to see young people when they come, because majority of people who come, they are people my age and older who work part-time and they can afford spending one day in a garden. Young people may not have that luxury. Because they have to work, especially if they moved out and they study and they have to earn money to, you know, support themselves. It's really hard for them also to do other stuff. But I know quite a few young activists, so I'm pretty positive things are changing.
Yeah.
This is not the same Australia I moved
totally.
to 30 years ago. You know, it's people are changing, the whole atmosphere is changing, and I think the pandemic we had speeded things up that way.
It's changing so much. Like when I first started my young adulthood, people would literally
you
yell
are
at
still
me.
Young adult.
Yeah, like 20 years ago when I was 18, like people would yell at me and abuse me verbally for doing what I was doing. Like they would just be like, "Oh, you stupid, hippie, climate change, blah blah blah."
Yeah.
But now not many people yell at me, not all the time. But I just noticed this shift maybe around 10 years ago in particular. It's like people are hungry for knowledge and hungry for solutions, whereas before they just dismissed it as an irrelevant, weird thing that didn't need any attention. But the majority of people are really, definitely in Australia, it's been polled numerous times, are very much wanting that progressive change.
Yeah, and I think young people drive it, but also people my age who may feel a little bit guilty that we haven't done enough. I remember being in primary school in the 70s, and we had a very good geography teacher, and we were talking extensively about greenhouse effect, climate change in the 70s.
Oh yeah,
It's like 50 years ago.
It's old news.
And we thought, well, it's going to be absolutely resolved. People are going to find other sources of energy, and everyone is going to live greener and better, and not exactly. And that was my generation. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't think we should pitch generations against each other. Like think what's happened has happened.
No. But it's been something which has been around for many years, and nothing was done.
I know, and what a devastation that is, because the people in power didn't suit their short-term gains, and I think that's the atrocity, and it makes me furious, and that rage really helps drive me.
But now it's something that affects voters.
Yeah, absolutely. So
and it's all over mainstream media. People are aware of what is happening. So it's getting better. It's getting louder.
So this federal election coming up is very interesting to us all. I think about how that comes out and what that will lead to. I have my fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers crossed too. Absolutely. So just looking if any other questions, guys. Because Hannah is probably losing her voice already.
Oh, no worries.
No? You can still talk, as one of my friends says, on the wet cement.
Good. I think I'm just looking through. There's a question: what prompted myself and my partner to choose Tasmania to settle?
Oh yeah.
I had already lived in Tasmania for around 5 years before we decided to move back, or maybe 7 years actually. So I had a lot of community here. But the main reason is when I first came here when I was 18 on a bicycle holiday, I rode my bike around the island and did lots of forest blockading. I was like, oh, this place is amazing. The level of cleanliness in the soil and water systems was really unique to other parts of Australia I'd been travelling through and living and farming in and gardening in. And I was like, you could, to the point where, you check the maps and see what's upstream, but you could always usually drink from the river water. And it's like, it's just so clean and abundant. Wow. You always check upstream, you're safe. But, and I could just see, as an island, the population was quite, very, very compact compared to other places. And I was like, this place is really special. And I grew up in subtropical Meanjin, Brisbane, where it's just kind of hot and wet. And it's really hard farming. I found it really hard farming and gardening. It's so...
Do you boil it?
So hard. And so I really enjoy the temperate climates. We have 4 distinct seasons. And
oh yeah, look, that's what I'm absolutely missing. I miss winter. I'm European, so distinctive 4 seasons. I could never find the attraction of the tropics and subtropics. If anything, I would move south.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So we came back to Tassie when we were living at Melbourne at the time, and I went, the life that I want to live is more intimate with my community, and it has quite a clean environment, and it's very, very, very close to nature. Really? And so instead of being in a mega city, and at that time, for most of the time I was in Tasmania for those first few years as an 18-year-old, people were like, "Why would you live in Tasmania?" Like it's like the arse end of Australia. But I'm like, it's so good. And now I think people are catching on. It's like, we love it, like every day, to the annoyance of my daughter sometimes. She's like, "Stop saying it, Mama." I'm like, oh, we're so lucky to live here. Like we're so lucky, and we don't take that for granted. And I live in beautiful Muwinina country at the base of Kunani, Mount Wellington, overlooking the amazing river and harbour. And I think having that connection to landscape and people, you can't beat it, it's amazing.
I absolutely know, because I remember my childhood in a village, which was different landscape. It was sort of the flatlands of Central Europe, big fields and forests and clean lakes and creeks. And we would just leave home in the morning during school holidays, and we would come back when we were hungry.
Yeah, love it. Love that. That's the dream.
Yeah, so I can't imagine this happening now, and not in big cities. Not everyone can move out to the country. The reality is majority of Australians live in cities. Yeah. So you are very lucky, to live in such a beautiful corner of the world. Tasmania is wonderful. I've been there 2 times, and it's just such an unusual place.
Absolutely. And we fully expect quite a few more million people to move to Tasmania because climate change, Okay. Climate change puts Tasmania as one of the safer, more stable places to live in the world. So we're aware of the luxury we have right now, and we don't pretend that it's not about to change. If not in our immediate future, then definitely in my daughter's future. And so I think in no way am I sitting down here going, yay, haha, you guys live in a mega city, I don't. I'm like, no. We're very much in this together, and megacities are the future of the world, like they're the reality of a lot of our population in the world. And how do we design them or redesign them so that they're healthy and as sustainable as possible within the current context,
and community minded too.
Yeah, and how do we prepare for that to happen in smaller places like Hobart and Tasmania? Right now, that's not the reality, but it will be in the near future. In the next generation, it will be, and that's just reality, because we'll see more climate refugee movement in and around Australia, everywhere. How do we prepare for that? And that's a really big thing that I think a lot about. Like, how do we do that so it's ideally as sustainable as possible, and it brings people along? Yeah.
Oh, well, hopefully we will manage to do something good in bigger cities as well. But it's been fantastic to listen to you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
What a life, and how many interesting things you've done. So it was great to have you here. I hope everyone else is happy. Selena, Matt, anything to say? You around, or everyone's on mute? Yeah, but thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, no worries. It's a real pleasure
about you.
Sorry, Margaret, picking up a question from the room.
Yeah.
So somebody has asked, can you tell us a little bit more about your book? We're curious to know, what's in it, and
yeah. Sure. So it's very much, it's a mixture. So it has a few clear chapters around community, food, home, and something else I forgot. Sorry. Haven't got it in front of me. It's really
fermenting.
Really but it's very much it answers a big question that I think about constantly, is how can we live a good life in the face of the climate emergency? So everything is put through that lens. So when I talk about housing, I take you around our personal house and show you how we've done things. I give you examples of how other people do things in Australia. And then I talk about why we do it and why it matters for climate action. So I map everything back to how it can help improve our situation. And I talk about everything from, and then I do that same thing with the garden and with the community. And I talk about whole system change as well, not just individual change. We need both. That was the other chapter, which is the most important one. I should remember that one. So very much about whole system change. Like,
Can I make another one? That was tiny.
Okay. Why we do what we do is very much connected to the collectivizing of whole system change. And that's why I talk about climate safe voting practices and moving the superannuation funds into fossil fuel free funds. And it's very much around that. And I'd tell my personal story about where I've come from, what I'm doing and where I'm going. And that's 100% centered around solution-based activism and having a crack. So, gosh, there's so much more I could say. But that's the nutshell, that's the vibe.
So where do we buy your book?
Oh, great. Check out your local independent bookstore. Most of them have had it. It is selling quite quickly. It's just having its third reprint, I believe. So, but I'll go to your local independent bookstores. They're the best people in the world. I've got to spend a fair bit of time with them in the past 6 months. They're lovely. And if they don't have it, ask them to order it in. Or you can go through our website through Booktopia as well. So there's, get it where you get your books from. Yeah. Oh, your library. Oh, a special shout out to libraries. You can borrow it from your local library, which is, I get so stoked my book's in the library. I think it's an incredible community resource, and how wonderful that you can just go borrow these books for free. Yeah.
And if something is not in your local library, you can submit request form. Yeah. All libraries have special request form where you request the book. You just have to get the number, what is it,
ISBN, yeah.
Yeah, ISBN number. So you just need to supply that, and the library will order the book.
It's like a magic system. How lucky are we? Like, it's so cool.
These are fantastic.
Yeah.
So if we don't have any more questions, and more questions from the room, Matt, you're on mute. You're on mute, Matt.
I was asking the room if there are any more questions, but I can't see any.
Cool.
Cecilia's put the book in the link there, so anybody can follow that. I've just put that on the big screen for people in the room.
Great, thank you. It's so lovely just to pop in even via Zoom to other permaculture groups. Like I would have loved to have heard about all the things that you guys are doing, because I'm sure it's like kick ass. So I'll meet you in flesh one day in the future.
That would be great if if we could have a look at this book. As I said, I haven't read it myself. I've heard about it and I was too busy.
Yeah, oh mate, like, so fair enough, you'll get there, no worries.
Yeah, I'll get there. Because I want to see what people do on their small scale and also with activism added to it. Because I can then recommend this book to other people, and especially young people, or they can borrow it from me. So, it's a good thing. So thank you so much for joining us and for talking about your life and the things you do. You are an inspiration, and I hope we will hear more from you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real joy. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Hannah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, that was fantastic. She's done